have a hypothesis is that watching violent television programs makes people more aggressive. And I have to test my hypothesis so that I can confirm if it's real, and I can report my report to other people. Okay, so please keep this in mind. And by doing research, or by doing different kind of research, especially experiments, I have to have variables. So the first terminology, the first terms I need you to remember is research variables. Okay. Variables are factors in an experimental setting that change in amount and kind. Factors in an experimental setting that change in amount and kind. And when we talk about variables, we mainly talk about two different kinds. The first one is independent variable, and the second one is dependent variable. I don't know if you know something about the differences between independent variable or dependent variable. I'm going to ask some questions. Okay, so in this hypothesis, what part is the independent variable? Evan, do you know it?
Well, it should be you watching the TV.
Watching TV.
A violent show.
Violent show. Okay. Yes and no. The part is correct, but actually, it's not so obvious. You have to. Okay, Serena, please.
The amount of hours that someone watched the violent television program.
The amount, right?
Mm.
Okay. Yes. Good. Better than Evan's. Okay, and this is the independent variable, which means the variable that we control, right? The variables that we control, we call them independent variables. And the dependent variable is if people would become more aggressive, or how many times people behave aggressively. Okay, it is the dependent variable. And dependent variables are supposed to change according to independent variables. Okay, yeah, you know about them, right? That's good. Any questions? Independent variables are the variables that you control. Okay, so independent variable, you can see the definitions here. But Evan, Serena were correct. So for that specific experiment, the independent variable is the amount, or I can say if people watch violent TV programs, can be the independent variable, okay, or the amount. Okay, and the dependent variable should be the times, how many times people behave aggressively towards other people will be our dependent variable. Okay. So here the keyword is manipulate. Independent variable is the variable that researchers manipulate. And it is the causal part of the relationship. Causal part of the relationship. And next term is really, really important, and you will definitely be asked about it, so please pay close attention. The question is operational definitions. The term is operational definitions. So what are operational definitions? Like in the experiment, researchers need not only to name the independent variables and the dependent variables, they have to explain how to measure the variables. Like how to measure if this program is violent program or not, or if this person's behavior is aggressive or not. You have to explain how you measure the variables. That is very important. And we call these definitions the operational definitions. Like in that experiment, I will offer an operational definition to the IV, the independent variable. Maybe the operational definition would be if the TV program contains more than 5 scenes of gunshot, then I call it a violent program. Okay, get it? operational definition. If it contains gunshot scenes for more than 5 times, including 5 times, then I call it a violent program. If it contains only 4 scenes of gunshot, okay, it's not a violent program. And the dependent variable would be if the person after watching this program would hit other people. If he or she just swears at other people, no, it's not aggressive behavior. Okay, only if he or she hits other people, we call it aggressive behavior. You get it? Okay, those are the operational definitions for my IV and DV. And here I wrote that most of the time researchers should quantify the variables. Okay, actually, it's the process of giving operational definitions to the variables. You need to quantify those variables. But why do we need operational definitions? Please think about it. Why researchers need operational definitions? Serena? Okay, that's your hand. Yes, please.
Because different people might have different perspective, like how they identify a term.
Yes, great, very good. It's one of the most important reasons. Any other reasons? Because people have different definitions of what our violent programs are, right? And what is aggressive behavior. Other reasons? Eric?
So the experiment can be replicated on like the same way, I guess.
Very good. So that if you have operational definitions, other researchers can repeat your experiment to see if your data is convincing or not. If you don't have operational definitions, other researchers cannot replicate your research. And if they cannot replicate, how can they test if your research is scientific enough? Right? Okay, very good. So experimenters must make sure the groups have equivalent situations when they are participating in the experiment, which means that they should watch the programs in the same setting, in the same place, or better at the same time and with the same level of light. Okay, you should try to do that to eliminate other situation-relevant confounding variables. Get it? Okay. And okay, there are several different types of situation-relevant confounding variables. The first one is called expectancy effect or experimenter bias. Experimenter bias. Experimenter bias will happen when a researcher or observer subtly, very important, subtly communicates to the participants the kind of behavior he or she expects, therefore creating the expected reaction or outcome. Okay. Because this is really important because psychological studies involve human beings, and human beings are really intelligent. They can sense the difference of your voices, or maybe your hand gestures will communicate some information to the experiment participants. Okay. So your voice, like when you are talking to the experimental group, you use a very high voice and to say like you really expect them to behave in a certain way. And when you are talking to the control group, you use a very low voice. And those participants, they may sense some differences in your voice, and they may act, they may behave according to their how do I say, their interpretation of your voice. Do you get it? Okay, but here is something very important is that the experimenters, they don't mean to do that. Means they don't do it on purpose. They don't do this on purpose. If experimenters do this on purpose, they specifically tell the participants in the experimental group, okay, you have to behave violently after watching this program. That's called fraud. That's a totally different thing. If a test is valid, it must also be reliable. Okay. Yeah. So if my test can actually test the IQ, then the results should be replicated, should be able to be replicated. Okay, yeah. Remember that, just a hard fact. Right? If, okay, a student asks a question, then yes, I'm going to ask that. Nice question, Julie. Then can it be reliable if it is not valid? Yes. So I can say validity is kind of like a higher standard. Maybe you can say it. Okay, and next one, terminology. And this page has a lot of important terminologies, but the main topic here is sampling. Okay. I will still use that hypothesis, like watching violent programs will make people more aggressive. If I want to do this research, I need a lot of people to participate in my research, right? Not a lot, but some people to participate in my research. Okay. Okay, I guess this hypothesis is a little bit too big. Okay, let me give you another example here. You are from different high schools, right? But let's just suppose you all come from the same high school, okay? And my hypothesis is that the number of hours you sleep every night will be related to your test scores. Okay, and this research is only about the students in your high school. I'm going to test if in your high school students' sleeping time is related to their test scores or related to their GPA. And let's suppose your high school has, I don't know, like 3,000 students, maybe. I don't know if there are that many. Okay, let's make it simpler, okay? Your high school has 1,000 students. I'm going to ask some of you to participate in my study, okay? Because I don't have enough time or enough money to ask all of you to participate in my study. I need to select maybe only 100 of you to participate in my study. And this process, I call it sampling. This process, like I select subjects or participants from population. This process, we call it sampling. And the population here doesn't mean like all the people in the whole world or all the people in the country. It's just my target population. We call it target population, like how all the students in your school. The population here in my study is all the students in your school. We call it population. Sometimes we call it target population. And I'm going to select 100 participants to participate in my, I shouldn't use select, I should use recruit. I'm going to recruit 100 participants to take part in my research. This process is sampling. Because I want my study to be convincing, and I hope that the results of my study can be generalized to other high school students, the participants I select must be representative sample, which means the sample must represent the whole population. They must be able to represent the whole population. The 100 students I recruit can represent all the high school students in your high school. If the 100 students can represent, I will call them the representative sample. Okay. Here's the question. How can I guarantee I can recruit the representative sample? I'm going to recruit 100 students out of 1,000 from your school. How can I guarantee that I can get the sample as representative as possible? Juno, I see your hand.
Like, if you wanted to select them randomly, maybe maybe select all the even numbers, like of this even student number people or something, and make them into the experiment or whatever. But just
Okay, great. And the third type of confounding variable is called placebo effect. It's very famous. I guess you've already heard about this term before. Okay. Placebo effect occurs when the experimental participants change their behavior in the absence of any kind of experimental manipulation. Okay. And this happens a lot in medical settings. When a pharmaceutical company invents a new medication and they want to test the effectiveness of the medication on the patients, and placebo effects happens a lot. I think placebo effects happens on you, on me as well. Sometimes if you have got a cold and after taking the medication, you will have an expectation. Okay, because I have taken the medication, I should get better. I should get better. Serena is shaking her head. Okay, that's good. You are resisting the placebo effect, but actually most people, their psychological state will affect their behavior or affect their interpretation or cognition. Okay, so after doing something, after taking the medication, you will expect you will get better. So how can we counteract this placebo effect? Think about it. Because it's kind of like human nature. After taking a medication, especially those people who suffer from like serious disease like cancer patients, after they take a new medication, surely they will like the medication would have some positive impact on their disease, and they may really feel better after this medication. But how can you say it's really because of the medication, but not because of their expectation, not because of any psychological factors? How can you make sure? And any volunteer, Eric?
How can we make sure? Like actually giving them the treatment instead of like pretending to give them treatment.
Yeah, I am giving them the treatment. I'm not pretending to give them the treatment.
I don't think you can. Can you really expect?
Can I really give them the treatment?
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, is there a way? I don't think there's a way that you can, like, stop a... well, you can't just tell the patient this isn't going to work. So,
no, I'm not going to tell them. I just tell them, that, okay, we have a new medication and I need some volunteers to take it and I will check the effectiveness of this medication. I'm not going to tell them, okay, this really works.
Wouldn't they have, like, a same kind of reaction, right? Because if you do bring them into an experiment, they're probably going to be like, oh, this is going to work. Because
yes, that's what is going to happen. So I'm asking, how can you counteract this effect? Okay, it's a hard question. I'm sorry, Eric. Okay, think about it.
So now you can use like a placebo, right?
Yes, I can use a placebo. Okay, I see. Sorry, Serena?
Oh, I was about to say, can give them the treatment when they're unconscious. So they
unconscious?
So they don't know or they don't remember like they got the treatment.
No, it's unethical.
Mm.
Actually, it's unethical. You have to tell the patients that they are going to take the medication and they have to consent to this experiment. That's what we are going to talk about later in this class. Okay, you cannot just knock them off, make them unconscious and feed them the medication. No, you cannot do that. Okay, I see some answers in the chat box. Not tell the patients if they are taking medication. No. Then put a group of people who consent and then tell them they may or may not get the medication. They may or may not get the medication. How can you do that? Because they are going to take the medication, right? But they only give half the medication. Julie is saying something here. Tell them they may.
Sorry, my throat. But you take a bunch of people who consent to, yes, I can get medication. I agree to get medication, and then you tell them that only half of them will get the medication, but you don't tell them who gets it. But they all consent to getting it, so you can choose who gets the medication. Then you give them the medication, and then after a few days, you test them out.
On the right track, but how can you make sure they don't know they have taken the medication?
Maybe put it in a cup, or like a coverless cup or something.
Okay, actually, you're on the same track. Okay, I'm going to save you some time. I will let the other group of people take the same medication, but this medication just look exactly as the real medication. They have no function. They have no effect. I'm going to ask the other group of people take this medication with the same appearance, but has no real effect. Okay, and after taking the experiment, I will compare the effects between the experimental group and the control group. If they get better to the same extent, I can safely say the medication doesn't work. Right? But if the patients in the experimental group gets a lot better than the individuals in the control group, I can say the medication, is effective. That is called placebo method. Okay, so we use placebo method to counteract placebo effect. You see that? Okay. Finally, we move on to the second research method. It's called correlation. Correlational or correlation. Please keep in mind, experiment is the only type that can establish cause-effect relationships. So all the other research methods we are going to talk about now, you cannot draw cause-effect relationships from them. So the first one is correlation or correlational research method. Correlational methods will help us to determine to what extent two variables, traits, or attributes are related. They do not imply causation. If we can use experiment to establish a cause-effect relationship, researchers will not choose correlation, but sometimes we cannot do experiments on certain types of behaviors because they are unethical or it's impossible. Like, I will offer you an example. I want to test my hypothesis that girl would more likely to get higher scores in language learning. Okay, girls are more likely to get higher scores on language tests. Okay, can I say the sex is the independent variable? Can I say the sex is the independent variable? No, because I don't control it. I don't assign Eric and Henry to be girls, and I don't assign Juno and Shelley to be boys, right? It is not something I can change. So sexes, genders, are not independent variables. And only in experiment, we have independent variables and dependent variables. In other types of research methods, we only have variables. We only have 2 variables or 3 or more variables, but we don't call them independent variable or dependent variable because I cannot control them. Or let me offer you another example. I want to test my hypothesis that children from single-parent family are more likely to suffer from mental illness than children from a family from children who have both parents. Can I recruit 100 families and force half of them to get divorced? No, I cannot do that. It's unethical, right? I cannot just tell these 50 families, okay, you have to get divorced so that I can do my experiment. It's ridiculous. So actually, in a lot of situations, we cannot do experiments. We can only check if there's relationship between 2 variables. Okay, get it? Okay. And when we talk about correlational methods, we often need to get a correlational coefficient. And next, we're going to touch on the ethical issues in research. That's why I said no to Serena's answers about taking the medication. You cannot just knock those people off and feed the medication to them. It's unethical, right? So when conducting psychological research, you have to obey those ethical codes because your subjects are human beings. Not like in your physics class, you do some experiments on balls, on hot water. Here, we deal with human beings. We have to be really careful. And ethical issues are really important when you are considering conducting a psychological research. And here on your textbook, on page, on page 68, you see an organization or institution called IRB 68. Okay, it's an institution founded by APA, American Psychological Association. And nowadays, if psychologists want to do research, want to do experiments, they have to report their process, the experimental process, to IRB to get approved so that they can conduct the studies. Otherwise, they are not allowed to do psychological studies or experiments. IRB must approve your experiments so that you can do it. They will assess if there's any ethical issues in your experiments. And they will also check if the procedures are reasonable enough. Okay. So actually, some of the most famous psychology studies in the history will not be able to conduct it nowadays, especially the 2 we are going to learn in the chapter of social psychology about the Stanford prison experiment study and the Milgram's obedience study. Okay, because those kind of studies put the participants at risk, both physically and psychologically. Okay. You cannot make people suffer after taking part in your experiments. It's not allowed. Okay.